Perfect.
Leadership is broken, not because leaders don't care, but because the systems they operate in reward control over curiosity, answers over questions, and speed over reflection. In corporate environments, coaching is often reduced to a buzzword, a checkbox on a performance review rather than a true cultural shift. Leaders are told to coach their teams, but without the tools, the time, or the mindset, coaching becomes performative, not transformative. In today's episode, we dive into the root of this issue with Dave Reynolds, author of the new book, Radical Growth. Dave believes the real leadership begins not with answers, but with the right questions. We are going to explore why most leadership development fails, how curiosity can unlock human potential, and what it takes to shift from directing to developing. If you are tired of top down management and ready to cultivate a leadership style that grows people, not just performance, this conversation is just for you. Dave, it is amazing to have you here today. I want to start with the real question. So, why did you write this book? What was the need to have this book out there?
Yeah, no, great question, Ivan. Thanks very much for having us on the show. You know what? It was one of the things that I had a mentor for about a decade in telecommunications that really, forced me out of my comfort zone by asking me really tough questions. And that really helped transform my career because it made me more of an independent thinker and then eventually like an interdependent, developer of people inside of the organization. And I saw the value of asking the right questions. And so it got me out of telecommunications and into consulting. And I could see the value of questions in an agnostic setting that we could walk into a law firm or an engineering firm or an ocean tech company and be able to ask really good questions and unlock the answers that people needed. So we really felt compelled as we started working with more organizations all over the world to actually share our process so we could, help organizations and corporations really cultivate, coaching culture in a more transformative fashion.
Mm. But tell me one thing, I'm curious. This story about having a mentor, your mentor, was it your boss or somebody else?
Yeah, it was actually my boss at the time, and I only worked for the company for 1 month, and he saw a lot of potential in me, and we set up a reoccurring call every single week, and he would invest in me every single week and ask me the toughest questions, and it really forced me to think differently versus it was just easy to answer quick questions before, but he would ask tough ones and be really good at giving silence. And so it forced me to not just give something that was easy to respond to, and he would accept it. He would wait until we really got to the right answer.
Tell me, in your book, there is a lot of focus on the art of questioning, and it's kind of the central theme for leadership development. Why? People says no, it's about emotional connection. People says it's about critical thinking. Why, for you, is questioning the central theme of developing leaders?
Yeah, and honestly, when we were developing the book, we really said it was almost kind of like the art and science of questions, because there's really kind of like a scientific side of asking questions and how people respond and how they react to it. But the art form of asking questions is around like timing and structure and design. And really, when you see somebody that's really, really good at asking questions in those forms and the way they deliver that question, it's totally transformative on how people respond. Because I think when people transactionally ask questions, they're looking to kind of check the box, like you mentioned. It's like they're looking for a quick response or a quick answer, versus when you ask kind of an art style question where you're really, thought about it, curated that question. You're not looking for the first answer. You're going to ask another question and another question and another question. And by the time you're 4 or 5 questions in, you've really got a good sense of the depth of the response. And I feel like the art form of questions is really about getting past surface level and getting deeper to the truth and really building transformative trust with the people you're asking questions to.
Now, there is questions and questions. Let me explain you. I know that it looks a little bit
Yeah.
messy because it is in my head. So I get nervous if I'm questioned about how to do something.
Yep.
Um, and I have the impression that the technical skills, if I'm getting asked on the spot a question about how to do things, I will get nervous. But
Mm.
if the journey is a little bit more about opening options, then I get a little bit more relaxed. So, how do you differentiate both of them? If you're put in the spot, like, how would you do that? That's a little bit makes people nervous, right?
It can, and I think like this is kind of why we look at how do we provide proactive questions so they get the sense to see the questions ahead of time before we meet. The challenge with that sometimes is then you think of what does the person want me to say? And
Mm,
so the advantage when you ask somebody a question on the spot is that they're kind of responding based on what they feel the true answer is. But I think to not make people nervous, I like to start with broader questions. So instead of asking them, "Hey, how does this work?" or "How do you do this?" I would ask something about the process. Why is this, process important to our organization?
mm,
What impact does it have on your role? How long have you been, doing this process for? Is there anything you've changed about the process? And then it would be get to the point of like, how would you actually go walk me through some of the steps of the process and really going through the process of like feeling like you're in the driver's seat versus, pushed into a corner. And I think that's why when we're asking questions, we want, and we almost named the book Curious Coach because we want to ask questions with curiosity versus really feeling like you're being interviewed or investigated.
mm. You have used a word that I love, curiosity, because I have the impression that in the standard uh, corporation, curiosity is not something that is fully rewarded. So we want innovation, but without curiosity. And curiosity starts by simple things that you observe in nature. And it's almost like you train your brain to create a reflex to ask the right questions. How does it work? What would solve the problem? But I don't think that people learns that or is even sometimes not encouraged because curiosity is mixed with the fact of wanting to know everything and sometimes people are a little bit keeping information. Is that correct?
Yep. Absolutely. And I love the idea of curiosity being like almost like when you get a little bit of a string, it's easier for you just to kind of keep asking questions and pull a little bit more out, feeling instead of feeling like a big deep pull, you're really kind of doing it together. And I think the beauty of asking the right questions is people feel like you're connecting with them instead of just trying to get something from them.
Mm,
And I think that's a really important part is that people should feel like it's a two-way conversation versus a lot of times leaders do a very much a one-way conversation, like I ask, you tell,
yeah.
and we're not really there to kind of share information. So I think the biggest thing that we try and do with a curious conversation is how do we create an exchange of information that both parties feel equal in the conversation?
Hmm. I read somewhere in your book that uh, growth begins when coaches do less and ask for more. And it's difficult because it's changing a little bit the vision of like if we think about the 80s. I wasn't working then. You weren't working then. But the idea was that we go to our boss to ask how to do things.
Yep.
Today, that has a little bit gone into an evolution, and it's not easy. Is there a way how leaders can make or craft the questions to drive meaningful conversation? Is there like a pattern that we can always use to ask really something that is going to provide value and is not going to scare people like in Shark Tank or whatever?
hmm Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the challenge is sometimes at the leadership level is that a lot of leaders really get addicted to being the person that has all the answers. So then they like having people come to them for confirmation or solutions or those kinds of things. But when they don't work, they blame the leader because they were the one that gave them the solution. But we actually use a reference in the book that I use with a lot of sales teams. And there was a sign that I put up is don't feed the ducks. And I always say, well, don't feed the ducks. Well, why don't we feed the ducks? Well, when you feed the ducks, they rely on the food. Well, it's the same idea when you do that in an organization is if you're always giving the answers, they'll just rely on you for the answers and you're creating a confirmation system that isn't building independent or interdependent thinking. So what we try and do is saying, how do we get the leaders when somebody comes to ask for a solution to actually change that conversation back to the employee and ask a question of one, what's the challenge? What are some of the solutions you've evaluated? And which one have you thought about selecting and implementing? And really put them in the driver's seat. So then sometimes they don't come to you as often because you're actually evolving the relationship with the employee. And I think that's really about when we think about doing less, the idea is because you're getting them to commit more to the actual execution of the solution. And it doesn't distance the relationship. If anything, it strengthens the relationship because you're putting the employees into more of the driver's seat and really being part of the solution. So when they execute really well on a project, they were the one that created the solution. And then the leader can recognize them for their creativity, their innovation, their execution, and it reinforces them being independent thinkers.
I, I have the impression that sometimes this uh, wanting to have an answer for everything is a masculine trait. Women have it less. And it's very difficult. Thinking about myself, I think in the workplace, back in my corporate days, I could refrain of doing that. But back at home, it is incredible. I cannot show up. I think I have to find solutions for everything. And uh, and sometimes doesn't play well, especially with my wife. Um,
Yeah.
is that correct? It's something that is so anchoring in our brain to for in and especially with masculinity associated with masculinity to have an answer because we feel like somebody needs us and we need to curate it to find a solution to that to a problem.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And we definitely do see it more in masculine traits. But I think too, it's also too a lot of the way that the leaders were, I guess, grown or succession planning designed inside of the organization or past leaders they had, is they always look for solutions from them and then they grew up through the organization. So I think
Mm,
it's a learned behavior,
yeah.
but if we want to break it, it's a matter of how much capacity can we open up if you ask better questions? And so a lot of times when we see people are struggling with, oh, capacity issues, well, it's generally because the organization is too dependent. So we usually do, because we do succession planning, when we look at an org structure and we say, hey, if you had to identify everybody that's dependent in the organization, put a, I guess a red square by them. And then anybody that's independent, put a green circle by them. And it's interesting to see how many people rely on somebody for information. So, their capacity is being drained by just giving solutions or giving confirmation. And we can open up capacity so much more by asking better questions to create more independent thought. And that's a really interesting area. But the addicted to having the right answers, we saw this actually with a leader that I had within my team years ago, is that I asked about capacity because he was down on sales, operations weren't going so well. And he's like, oh, I'm constantly answering the phone and putting out fires. I said, okay, perfect. How are you helping them think about the solutions for themselves? And you could just tell he hadn't. So we went through this whole process of asking the right questions. Within a week, he said, well, my phones aren't ringing as much and we're getting more people still solving those problems. It was funny because in the long term, he enjoyed it so much that he thought he wanted to have that phone ringing again. So he ended up leaving the organization to look for another leadership role where he could be the person that everybody comes to. And the thing is, it's leaders that develop leaders that evolve organizations. And that development is really coming down to how are you getting them to think differently through asking the right questions. So really changing that approach is really critical.
This word capacity is the key because I think that it's not about providing only the capacity for others, it's also providing to you because it lets you go of all these responsibility or all these challenges that many have with delegation because now you are sharing the problem. You are going to be part of the solution, but you are not the solution. And that releases a little bit more the stress. And when we have a stress, we fuck up everything like innovation. Or having time to personal conversations because
Yeah.
under stress we cannot no matters I still remember back in the days of corporation, I when I had an assessment about emotional intelligence, I was scoring high, but my team thought that I was sucking at that because I was simply too nervous all the time, no time,
Yep.
stressed about the results and not about empowering my team. And there was my company didn't know that because they only see an assessment. And in the assessment, of course, there in theory, I knew the answers, but in the reality, I was a disaster.
Yeah, and those are interesting environments too, like where you see somebody is the person that owns the results. Like, so
Mhm.
leader owns the results, they're being assessed on them. But in reality, in a really good coaching culture environment, the leader should be sharing the results with everybody on their team. And by asking better questions, everybody's part of the plan and everybody's part of the results. And the thing that I like about, the process when we're asking good questions in those areas is that when you're asking somebody a question, they come up with a solution, they make a commitment to implementing something, they have more ownership over
Mm.
it because they thought of it. And so if you have more people on your team that have higher levels of ownership, they're going to have higher levels of engagement and they're going to be more passionate about execution because it's their plan versus your plan as the leader. And I feel like that is where we get more servant or circular style leadership. And people are more willing to follow a leader that they feel they're part of the plan versus just executing somebody else's plan. And I think that for me is really inspiring when you see that inside of organizations because you can see it in the results, you can see it in the engagement, and you can see it in the retention levels because people want to lean into a team or an organization that does that.
Mm. I have the impression that obviously, I mean, reading your book, for instance, is not going to change from one day to the other a person because you need to practice. And people always have the expectation that I read, I apply, then change will come. But it doesn't come naturally. It needs to be done. You need to get rid of something that is quite powerful, the old habits, the old patterns that you have. And I wanted to ask you, so what are the challenges that you have seen for people starting
Mhm.
to develop this approach of asking the right questions? And I don't want to say asking questions because it looks dumb asking questions just like that. No, asking the right questions in a natural and genuine way. What are the pitfalls that you have observed?
Yeah, so you know what? This is a really good way of almost unlearning and reprogramming when we get into an organization because whenever somebody comes to you, even if it's a peer-to-peer, you get asked a question, your immediate response is to give an answer. Getting leaders to actually think about when I get asked a question, how do I ask a question back? And that is, different for them to think. So it's a bit of a paradigm shift. And so I would say that's probably the biggest starting point is getting people really good at leadership levels to not responding with an answer, but responding with a question. And when
Mm.
people start saying,
Yeah.
okay, the employees start saying, okay, they're on to me now. I have to be ready to respond now and ask that and go through. And I'll even give you an example as an activity where we try and, reprogram and unlearn the way that we're just throwing solutions all the time is we'll put a problem on the board. And typically when we put a problem on the board, everybody wants to throw solutions at it. And we should do this, we should do that, and we could change this. We do 10 minutes. Everybody in the room has to ask questions about the problem. And so where did the problem start? Who's involved in the problem? What customers is it impacting? It's interesting when you look at a board full of questions that you can actually see the solution easier by putting those questions into categories. And so I would say coaching culture really starts with really changing the way that leaders respond to questions with questions. And that really allows them also to be a little bit more calculated with what they're asking or what they're responding to. Because when you're just immediately throwing a solution back, you're kind of doing it in a reactive style. Where if you're asking a question back, you kind of do it in a proactive style because there's a lot of intention behind asking a question. So I think that those would be the two main things that I would really focus on is like really getting leaders to reprogram the way that they respond to questions with questions and taking even a 3-second pause to think about something so you don't feel like you have to respond right away and
Mm.
really thinking about the intention of the question.
I have seen very often corporations that call themselves we that say, they claim that they have a coaching culture. Uh, Nevertheless, I observe that what they have is that they have added the task of coaching people to leaders by providing a training of coaching that could last from 3 days to 5 days, where the poor guy is going to be learning maybe 20 to 30 different approaches of coaching, but not devoting enough time to the simplicity of questioning. That area, it would be maybe 10% of the full training. It's a long training. And the problem is that we have overcomplicated this story with coaching for leaders by giving them a coaching training, almost
Hmm.
like a life coaching with a lot of NLP inserted inside, and it's too complex. And we don't have the time. We need to devote results, and there is nothing that tells them you can do it in the flow of work. But questioning,
Hmm.
you can do it in the flow of work. You don't need to have like a full 1 hour of preparation. I will use this technique and another technique. No, I just focus on questioning and that's it. And organizations fail to implement this culture of coaching. What would be your recommendation for
Hmm.
organizations who really want to do a culture of coaching? What could be the way to really deploy it across an organization without feeling that like it is another thing that I have to do on top of my job that I'm, and by the way, it's very often you are judged on the results of your job, and whatever you do as coaching is nice to have, but there is a claim.
Yeah. I think that we're big on data. You know, whenever we work with organizations, we always try and access data right off the bat. So I would say that I would get an organization to start looking how often is coaching happening inside of the organization, like real coaching, both formal and informal.
Yeah.
How is it being tracked and traced? Like, so what does that conversation actually look like? Is it transactional? Who's leading it? And I would start pulling all this data together because it tells the current state analysis of what their coaching environment actually is. And we would really look at it and say, is this a coaching culture? Is this an investment or is it just a process we're seeing as, kind of checking the box on? And are we getting true return on coaching today? And a lot of times they're going to say, not really, it's inconsistent. So what we do is we try and start looking at better coaching models because a lot of times coaching is how do I identify the gaps or the challenges somebody's facing? And a lot of people just feel like they're being picked apart, like it's a performance review. And then they get a list of all the things they're not doing right, and then they're off to the races. And they feel broken down versus built up. And but if we look at sports and we say, well, how pivotal is coaching in sports? Well, it could be the make or break for any organization. And if you look at any sports team that's made a pivotal change in their win streak, is usually when they change the coaching, not when they just get that one player that changes everything because they change the way that people communicate, the way that people execute, the way that people are held accountable. But it's in a way that's motivating that people want to go farther, people want to invest more. So what we would do is we'd look at the current environment of how people are coaching, and then we would walk them through how we coach today around asking questions. And we do a really fun activity. I'll give you an example, and we pull a group up. We say, okay, here's what we're going to do, and I'll show people how to juggle with one hand. And everybody's like, oh, this is really cool. I said, here's what you're going to do: break into pairs. Now teach each other how to juggle with one hand. Generally, nobody knows how to juggle, so they're kind of telling each other, you do this, you got to do that, throw it higher, catch the other one. And so the reason why we do this activity is because one, it's challenging to do. We give them a 2-minute timer, so it's time based. And we try and see how they respond to difficult situations that are time based. And what we end up seeing is a lot of people just telling each other what to do. And in most environments, that's what the coaching looks like. Yeah, I'm telling you what you need to do. You need to go do it. And so they're trying to reinforce that. So then I take somebody that I see is struggling the most. I pull them up to the front and I say, hey, when you saw me, throw the first ball when I was juggling with one hand, what did you notice about the first ball? And they're always like, oh, like, you threw it high. Okay, interesting. Why was me throwing it high important, do you think? Well, they'll usually say, I think it's probably when you throw the second ball or it gives you space. Interesting. Okay. If I threw it high, when would you throw the second ball, do you think? And they're like, well, I guess when the first one gets to the highest part. Interesting. Okay. And so what we try and do is we actually just through observation and questions get them to test their own theories that they observed. And we are always successful with getting somebody to juggle. And it's really interesting because I get the groups up and say, what was the biggest challenge you faced when you were coaching? Is they're like, well, we're trying to get them to do something hard that they've never done before under a time base. And I said, Interesting. How often does that happen in your company?" They're like, all the time. I said, so do we understand why coaching is not effective when we're just telling somebody what they need to be doing, even though they already have the answers because they've observed them? I said, what did you notice about me when I coached them? They said, all you did was ask questions and you gave them space to think about their own solutions. And then you gave them comfort to actually test it and try it because they try it and they usually drop it a couple of times. But within a couple of times, they juggle because we give them the ability to feel vulnerable enough to own the answers. And we really see when organizations see that as coaching, they're like, okay, now we can change the way that we coach inside of our organization because we can influence growth differently. We have the ability to influence execution and accountability. And I would say that that is a really big part of coaching culture, but also too, we commit to creating a system inside our organizations so coaching is consistent. Because I've never gone to an organization where they didn't value feedback and coaching, but it was always done in an ad hoc sense, like as in when it needed to happen or they were trying to put out a fire. But coaching should always be consistent, like a consistent investment. Same as if you and I are working out or running, you can't just run when you want to run. You've got to run consistently all the time to get better. And coaching is no different. It's like a muscle that you have to keep investing into. And that's really where we see the biggest transformation in organizations that really lean in and have a consistent methodology, and everybody sees the ROI of having the right system in place.
So if I understand correctly, you your approach is not a one-off, like you come, you teach them for X number of hours, how to implement this questioning approach, but you follow up in order to create the system because the system can disappear after the trainer, the facilitator, or the Sherpa
Yeah.
disappears.
Yeah, I honestly, we will say no to more contracts or workshops if we can't own the implementation. Reason being is the workshop is always transformative. We have 6 modules, and everybody has a lot of work to do, and it really changes their paradigm. But where the transformation happens is when they go out and test it. Because the idea is, it takes about 90 days to see a result from a new behavior. So we've got to be with them for 90 days to follow up on how was that discovery session? Did you follow up on the last, coaching conversation? How is execution? Are they committing to the process? And then the next 90 days, say over a 6-month period, is really about are we systemizing and building habits of coaching? And so this is where we say, oh, we found somebody's being really difficult. They're not really giving us, what kind of questions are we asking? How are they responding? Are you giving them space to think? How much silence are you giving them? Have you tried mirroring? And so what we do is we refine and make them better coaches by giving them the opportunity to use real scenarios, not as like a synthesized scenario that just sounds like, oh, that's idealistic, right? We
Yeah.
want their hardest employees to coach as examples. And really, once they go through the process of trying and testing and going through, they start seeing these breakthrough moments when we stick with organizations over that 1 year period. And now, when we look back at some of the organizations we helped 5 or 6 years ago, they're still owning that system and still executing at the same cadence that they did when we originally started with them.
You have used the word we several times, not we in French, but we like us. Who is that we? What is your organization? And what do they do?
Yeah, thank you very much. No, so our organization is called the Ruminate Group. So what we are is we're a growth consulting firm. So we focus and we started with executive coaching and we broke into succession planning and performance management. And for a lot of organizations all over the world, we've done customized learning and development programs because we were so passionate about learning, development, implementation, execution that we really dove into that. And then once we started doing more coaching with a lot of organizations at the middle management layer, executive layer, or board layer, we got asked saying, could you ever create a program for us internally that we could have our own coaching program that is really just ours? And that's actually where we started creating the Radical Growth Coaching Program, which is really a byproduct of our book. So organizations can really take our process and our practices and embody it inside of their organization because we've always had a growth mindset and we've always been an abundance thinker versus, oh, we want to keep our process, as intellectual property. We want to share it with everybody because we see the benefits to the employees when a good coaching culture is implemented.
I love the fact that you have integrated that it's not about selling training, but solutions. For instance, I love the fact that you have put performance management as part of the package because I have the impression that if the way we assess people is not in line with this coaching culture, it's a disaster. So I saw it live. The fact that giving away for coaching time for coaching uh, efforts it was not part of the performance management. I was assessed about certain skills that were about me, about my results, and not about what I was giving back to the organization. And I found it completely irrational. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like the organization was throwing money out of the company just because I've had a training that probably costed a bomb because they trained me like in a very beautiful institute. And I wasn't able to leverage on that. Really, I could have done more in this area. But without the right performance management, without the right processes in place and the right reinforcements across the organization, who cares, right?
Yeah. Well, because I come from a sports background in multiple sports, we always say people play differently when they keep score. And so we always use the reference of saying, hey, if you're at a football game or a hockey game or a soccer game, even if you're in the stands and you're kind of watching the game, how can you tell who's winning or losing? And they're like, oh, we'll look at the scoreboard. Perfect, amazing. How can you tell how much time is left in the game, what quarter it is, or what period it is? Oh, we look at the scoreboard. I say, when I'm in your organization, I'm an employee. Can I do the same? And they're like, hmm. And I know we have access to more things like BI tools, but in most places, we do it in a very complex or over complex manner. We have to simplify performance management in a way that you should have a scoreboard at all the times that you know when you're winning or losing. Because I'll always say to people when we're doing workshops, they say, okay, if you're on a team and you're losing and it's the middle of the game, do you play differently than you're winning? Yeah, of course we do. Amazing. But if you didn't know you're losing, would you play differently? They're like, probably not. No. Okay, perfect. So if we knew that we were losing, what would you do differently? And we start getting different tactics and behaviors. And it's a matter of going, okay, perfect. Are you tracking those tactics or the behaviors? Because inputs drive outputs. Because there should be two scoreboards. Your scoreboards of your outputs, the things you've accomplished, but then there should be scoreboards of your inputs. It should be calls, meetings, follow-ups, whatever they might be, because we always know, kind of like the Pareto principle, 20% of what you do delivers 80% of your results. You should know those two or three behaviors that give you the highest ROI, and that should always be your scoreboard.
Uh, I remember that once upon a time, because I'm a geek, so I play a lot of with information. I read some reports that nobody reads. And I remember seeing that the investment of companies in coaching just before COVID, 2 years before, had dropped significantly. So they were giving up. Now, the investment came back in the middle of COVID, but it came back to different hands. One of the biggest winners were companies like Better Up, who have this association of
Hmm.
coaching, but I give you data too.
Yep.
Because before that, it was we hired a life coach that we know from who was my friend in university and comes here to do life coaching. But that wasn't a solution. We needed to have real meat, as you say. We cannot know
Yeah.
if we are progressing, and it's not the kind of data like how many people are satisfied about coaching. It is about the real outcomes, the behaviors, the changes that have happened, and as you said, which ones have the biggest impact on the organization. It's not easy. This is a story about creating data because you can go full bullshit into satisfaction with code, into real behaviors, but it's not always easy, and it needs constant data flowing about what has changed, and it's not a
Yeah.
once per year measurement. It is something that could be quite easily like dropping stars in Uber or whatever.
Yep.
But what is your take? How much effort did it take you to find a way to really measure the impact of coaching in an organization?
Yeah, and so I would always say that we're on the performance coach or growth coaching side. So again, we'd almost go back to the analogy of saying, would you rather have a life coach running a performance-based company, or would you rather a performance-based coach that really comes from a growth area running it? A lot of times they're always going to shift to there because we know what it takes to win. And we'll also push and challenge people to think differently through questions. So we increase the level of accountability and really kind of push people outside of their comfort zone. And I think that's where we have to challenge people to think differently and execute at a higher level. But the whole measurement system that comes along with, coaching is critical because one of the things early on we would ask is, well, in this organization, how do you measure success? Like, what does a true ROI look like? And in some law firms we work with, they're like, oh, billable hours. They said, okay, perfect. So if we invest in this engagement, an increase in billable hours would be the highest degree of success. And they're like, excellent. So what we try and do is we look at the starting metric and then we look at the finishing metric. And there was one law firm that we worked with, and he quadrupled his billable hours. And actually, over time, he ended up becoming a partner in the law firm. And because we really added the business side of law, where it was a matter of like, we built strategic relationships, we track more inputs where previously there was just all, where did they finish at the end of the month? It really was transformative because it was just easy to see that number. Other organizations it would be, our biggest focus right now is retention levels. We have to keep the team members we have. So we might use coaching as a development strategy inside of the organization, and we would consistently look at retention levels at a leadership level or engagement scores. And then we look at that, but there's always a before and an end metric where we look at the return for organizations. And I would say when we've tracked over the years, our average ROI is about 7 to 8 times. So when people make an investment, it might be, a high investment, but we know where the return's going to be. And
Yeah.
we just recently had a smaller consultancy go from, they just started out in philanthropic consulting, an incredible organization, and they were about 100,000 in revenue, and they're just at the million mark in under a year. And so, our ROI for us is not only are we building a scalable business that's going to grow and develop, but at the velocity that they wanted it to.
Oh, that's beautiful. Now, there is a little bit of a threat for coaching. Um, um, how long time ago? It was maybe a couple of weeks ago that I read that one of the main uses of AI is personal development. That means
Mhm.
that people are asking questions about themselves.
Yep.
And even though there is some people who say, yeah, nobody can trust AI, they are doing it, especially younger people. They trust because it's better. Because I'm
Yep.
afraid. I mean, Dave, if I had to tell you my personal life and all the stuff, I don't want that. And AI is going to shut up if I tell all my doubts, and I don't feel judged by AI. And it has become a little bit more conversational, a little bit more understanding. So people are using it. It's in the
Mhm.
top three of uses of AI. What would be the right way to integrate AI to leverage on the best of what a human being can provide and a little bit of, I mean, AI offers us a scale, and that's a little bit tricky for organizations to for a scale. We need to have X number of coaches, which it represents the use of resources, or having external people, which it means using money.
Yep.
How can we balance this use of AI for coaching in organizations?
It's definitely there's a huge benefit by having AI because you can obviously create questions, you can build on questions, you can build on systems, you can do really deep self-reflection. You can
Mm.
program in voices or types of personalities that you want to be coached through, which I think is great. I think sometimes though the challenge that I see when people are using coaching for themselves through AI is that sometimes they're creating a sense of getting the answers they want to hear versus the answers they need to hear. And coaching is really about being that, challenging person or that person that's going to, kind of get you to think differently. And a lot of times where we see our biggest growth with coaching isn't by telling somebody what they want to hear. It's about telling somebody what they need to hear and getting them to think differently. So sometimes AI isn't going to force you to think differently by prompting you out of something you've asked to because it's in a servant style relationship that it's created. So sometimes it can be detrimental in some ways because you're coaching yourself to believe something that you're telling it. But from an information source, I mean, AI has probably going to change the world in a lot of ways.
Mm.
But I would say the work that we do, you really need that human-centric approach to coaching to really make sure that are we pushing them outside of their comfort zone? Did they follow up and really execute? Do they have the results? Because we look for scoreboards and we look for success metrics. An AI is not always following up and saying, "Hey, you didn't do this," unless you've got it webbed into a system that you're using. So I would say those are the things that it's missing. But the advantage is, I mean, you can create better systems, you can create better templates, you can create great questions. But I still think you're missing the human-centric side of what coaching does for organizations. But I think the hybrid of both together is an incredible model because I'm seeing a program we're actually designing right now with AI to actually start seeing trends in coaching. So if you look at coaching sessions as almost like chain link, like one session connects to the next and they're linked together, it's understanding the relationship of growth as you transition between each of those conversations. That what should you be coaching on next? So the biggest challenge most organizations is they coach reactively, not proactively. And having an AI system allows you in most cases to be better prepared for coaching,
Mm.
where you're doing it in a reactive way. So I would say those are the areas that we're trying to innovate on. That's allowing people to have a different set of dashboards and see things that maybe they can't see, and so there's a lot of things that are on the horizon for AI too, and how things are developing as well.
I know, and something that you mentioned is um, about creating the systems when the coach is not there, because what happens or what I have observed in coaching is sometimes you do a session and then you start doing something about it, actions, uh, just closer to the next session. And that's bullshit, in fact, because you need
Yeah.
to start as of when the session, the change should start practicing already with mistakes and all the stuff uh, after that session. And I saw a beautiful use case of AI where you plug in the app and it starts recording your conversation. So it will tell you, are you using the right type of questions or not? You can debrief, and your coach, when you see him again, can see, yeah, out of 5 interactions that I have got during the week, there is this dimension that has been good, this other dimension that has been shitty, and so on. That
Hmm.
I find it quite nice because it really reinforces this reflex because we want to create reflexes on people
Big
to
time.
do it naturally.
I use it with sales organizations all the time because when they're doing outbound calls and they're running a script or they're trying out a new strategy. It's a matter of going, okay, if you listen to the audio of it, how responsive was the customer to that outbound strategy? Where could we have either paused or changed the question? How could we maybe overcame that objection? So there's a lot of different coaching scenarios that are evolving because of AI. And we're really excited about it because there is still that human element that will continue to keep adding and curving the way that that coaching model is growing.
I have one last question about this topic. Is
Please.
there any company that you admire because they have succeeded to have this coaching mindset? But don't mention one of your customers. I want you to mention a company that everybody knows.
Yep. So are you able to say the question again?
Yes. Do you have an example of an organization that is known by most of us to that has been successful to implement a coaching culture?
Yeah. So the I would say the organization that we've worked closest with has been an organization called League Data. And so
Uh-huh.
they're very connected into the credit union system. And we've worked with them for probably about 5 years. And they have an absolutely incredible coaching culture inside of their organization. And the leaders have really owned the way that they ask questions. And you can really see now it's very much in their DNA. And I would say where I see the biggest benefit is that when you see their customers and you see their stakeholders and you see their board members, they see how much transformation the leadership team has made just by the way that they're coaching, and not even so much coaching their employees, but how they communicate externally is instead of, asking or telling people what needs to happen, it's really curating the right questions throughout the process. And it's been very transformative, just some of the work that we've been able to do with them, within coaching, within succession planning, within really the performance management side as well. And we just see that organization to continue to evolve and grow year over year.
Hmm. I love the fact that you have put coaching back in front of everybody because you are not using coaching as an activity, but as a system in the organization. And that's something that I felt very often is missing uh, in various corporations. Dave, what is the best way to reach you out if people have questions to you about your methodology, about your
Yeah.
book? How do they reach you out?
Yeah, so the book's sold on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kindle, but also too, you can check us out on Ruminate, so Rumin 8 group.com. But also too, I'm on LinkedIn all the time, so if anybody wants to reach out, it's Dave Reynolds, and we also have a business page on there as well, and we'd love for people to reach out and connect with us.
You know what? I'm going to put that one. I think that your book is a book that needs to be in the hands of many leaders today. Radical Growth, transforming into an unstoppable leader. That is going to be something that people need today. Secondly, I will put Ruminate website and your direct link to your LinkedIn profile, where now is the place to meet everybody.
Great, that's amazing. No, I appreciate it. I mean, amazing show and fantastic questions. I appreciate you having me on.
It was really nice to have you with me, Dave. Thank you very much for your time and consideration. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.